What if I told you that every shocking scandal in UFC history, every banned fighter, every insane backstory, and every rule the UFC was forced to rewrite is all packed into this one video? From the most controversial moments inside the octagon to the fights that changed the sport forever, nothing is off limits here. And trust me, as crazy as it gets in the first minutes, the wildest moment is still coming halfway through. So don't blink, don't click away, and smash subscribe now, because you do not want to miss the ending.
What if I told you the UFC's biggest fights aren't just decided in the cage? That behind the knockouts, weigh-ins, and scorecards, there's a shadow game at play. A game of secret deals, sudden rule changes, and moments so perfectly timed they feel scripted. Tonight, we're pulling apart the theories fans whisper about when the cameras stop rolling. From suspicious scales, to scorecards that make no sense, to the money trails nobody's supposed to see. Some of these stories are backed by real evidence. Others live only in the shadows. But one thing's for sure, once you hear them all, you'll never watch the octagon the same way again. The new testing era. Let's start with the one thing every fighter is supposed to fear, the drug test. For nearly a decade, the UFC trusted one name, USADA. Love them or hate them, they were the outside watchdog, the people who could show up at a fighter's house at 6 a.m., knock on the door, and demand a sample. Then in 2024, it all ended quietly, suddenly, and with more questions than answers. The UFC announced they were cutting ties and moving to a brand new in-house program run by Combat Sports Anti-Doping, CSAD, with collections handled by Drug Free Sport International. They promised the same rules, the same banned substances, the same random visits. They even brought in a big name, Jorge, a former FBI special agent famous for interrogating Saddam Hussein, to give the new system credibility. But here's the problem. USADA didn't leave smiling. They publicly said they were disappointed, warning that fighters had lost a truly independent safety net. And for hardcore MMA fans, that sounded like a red flag, because now the UFC isn't just promoting the fights, they're also managing the testing. It's like the referee owning one of the teams. From that moment, theories exploded. It'll be easier to look the other way. Stars will get special treatment. The guys selling the tickets won't suspend the guy filling the seats. And the timing didn't help. Some fighters returned from long layoffs looking more muscular, more explosive, and somehow faster. To the conspiracy crowd, that wasn't training. That was chemistry. Now, to be fair, the new program has already made some catches. Just months into its launch, Azamat Murzakanov was suspended for 6 months after testing positive, traced back to what was ruled a contaminated supplement. It proved the system could still bite. But here's the thing. Catching someone once in a while isn't enough to erase suspicion. Not when the people in charge have millions riding on certain fighters staying active. And that's the tension that fuels this theory. On paper, the UFC's testing program is airtight. In the minds of doubters, it's a locked door with the key still in the promoter's pocket. Judging Whiplash. If drug testing decides who's allowed to fight, judging decides who gets to win. And if there's one thing guaranteed to set the internet on fire, it's a scorecard that doesn't match what the audience just saw. Every UFC fan has lived this moment. The final horn sounds, the stats appear on screen, and one fighter clearly landed more shots, controlled the pace, maybe even scored takedowns. Yet somehow, the other guy's hand gets raised. That's when Twitter goes nuclear and the word rigged starts trending. Take UFC 280, Petr Yan versus Sean O'Malley. In the eyes of most media outlets and fight analysts, Yan edged the bout. He landed more significant strikes, controlled more of the octagon, and many saw him dictating the fight's rhythm. But 2 of the 3 official judges gave the nod to O'Malley in a split decision. The reaction? Immediate outrage. Fighters like Khabib couldn't believe it. Fans called it a gift, WWE-style booking, even the death of credibility. And this isn't an isolated case. There's UFC 310, where Alexander Volkov lost a close decision to Cyril Gane and accused one judge, Adelaide Bird, of blatant incompetence. The same judge who years earlier scored the Canelo GGG boxing match so wildly off that it was called scandal. When names like that pop up on MMA scorecards, it feeds the theory that certain judges have patterns, and those patterns aren't random. Now, officially, judging is handled by independent independent athletic commissions, not the UFC itself. There's no smoking gun of bribes or backroom deals. But here's the fuel. The fighters who seem to benefit most from these razor-thin calls are often the ones with the brightest star power, the bigger followings, the better pay-per-view pull. That doesn't mean corruption, but to a suspicious fan, it sure feels like coincidence is working overtime. And the stats don't always help. Sometimes the numbers on screen are misleading. Sometimes judges weigh different criteria heavily. And sometimes you just have to wonder if they were watching the same fight you were. The UFC will tell you that judging is subjective. Fans will tell you that subjective sound a lot like flexible. And when scorecards keep breaking in favor of the UFC's most marketable names, one question keeps echoing. Are we watching a sport or a product being carefully managed for maximum profit? In the UFC, not every battle ends with blood and bruises. Some end in silence. A kiss that stunned the world. Half a pound that cost a crown. A 5-year exile over smoke. A war snub by the judges. And a champion crucified for playing it safe. These aren't just controversies. They're turning points. Moments that never made the highlight reel, but changed everything. Welcome to the dark side of the octagon, where rules are bent, reputations are made, and history is rewritten without a single punch thrown. If you love stories the cameras tried to forget, hit subscribe. You're about to see MMA like never before. Starting with UFC Weird Kiss. At UFC 306, Merab Dvalishvili did something no one had ever seen in a UFC title fight. He kissed his opponent. Midway through round 2, while riding Sean O'Malley's back in a grappling exchange, Merab leaned in and pressed his lips against the back of O'Malley's neck. The crowd fell silent. So did the commentary booth. It was so surreal, referee Herb Dean had to step in and say words no one ever expected to hear in the octagon. Don't kiss him. And Merab didn't deny it. After the fight, he explained that it was a mental tactic, a psychological play meant to assert dominance, shake O'Malley's composure, and make a statement. It wasn't disrespect, he told reporters. It was dominance. I was showing him who's the boss. That's why I kissed him. Dana White's reaction? Dry and confused. Weird. I don't know what that was. And maybe that's exactly the point. It wasn't a strike or a foul. It was a bizarre middle school mind game played out on the biggest stage of the year. But the kiss was just one part of the story. The rest of it was pure suffocation. 5 rounds of relentless pressure, chain wrestling, mat returns, and positional control. Merab didn't knock O'Malley out. He drowned him minute by minute. O'Malley had flashes, quick escapes, glimmers of striking brilliance. But by the final bell, the decision was clear. 49-46, 48-47, 48-47. A new bantamweight king was crowned. Ever the showman, O'Malley took it on the chin, but with a grimace. That was gross, he said, leaving the octagon shaking his head. Yet for all of Merab's grinding dominance, it was the kiss that went viral. The internet lit up. Some laughed, some cringed, others felt it crossed a line, but no one forgot it. But not every headline is made inside the cage. Sometimes, the biggest blows land before the fight even begins. Charles Oliveira walked into UFC 274 as the reigning lightweight champion. But before the fight even started, his title was already gone. At the official weigh-ins, Charles stepped on the scale and came in at 155.5 pounds, just half a pound over the lightweight championship limit. Under commission rules, for a title fight, even half a pound over is disqualifying. The response was immediate and brutal. Oliveira was stripped of the title. The belt was declared vacant, no exceptions. But something didn't sit right. According to Charles and his team, he had checked his weight multiple times the night before using the digital scale in his hotel room. It consistently read 155.0. His nutritionist, strength coach, and coaches all confirmed he was on point. Yet, by morning, the official scale said otherwise. And Charles wasn't alone. Several other fighters on the same card, including featherweights and flyweights, also missed weight by exactly 0.5 pounds. Rumors spread like wildfire. Someone had tampered with the scale. Later, UFC officials confirmed that the digital scale had been recalibrated, likely by foreign fighters or cornermen unfamiliar with how the mechanism worked. It wasn't illegal, but it was enough to throw the readings off, just enough to matter. Still, the Arizona State Athletic Commission didn't budge. There were no allowances, no exceptions, no reviews. Charles came back an hour later and made weight on a second attempt, but by then, it was too late. The rulebook was clear. Only fighters who make weight on the first try are eligible to compete for the title. The defending champion had become just another contender. But Charles didn't fold. He stepped into the octagon that night without his belt. and submitted Justin Gaethje in the first round. It didn't matter. The win wasn't recorded as a title defense. MMA used to be a wild experiment. No weight classes, no groin protection, and no clue what was legal. From nut shots to Speedos, these are the insane moments that forced the UFC to rewrite its rules forever. These moments didn't just shock fans, they changed the sport forever. And if you love the real stories behind MMA, hit that subscribe button now, because we're going deep. Start with Royce Gracie, too dominant. Royce Gracie entered the UFC and quickly became a household name due to his unparalleled Brazilian jiu-jitsu skills. His dominance was so overwhelming that it prompted significant changes in the structure of the sport. Gracie's success led to the introduction of time limits for fights, which prevented endless bouts that could leave fighters exhausted and at risk. Additionally, the establishment of weight classes ensured fair matchups, allowing fighters of similar sizes to compete against one another. Moreover, the introduction of rounds and judges transformed the scoring system, providing a more structured approach to determining the winner of a fight. As many have said, Royce didn't break the rules. He exposed the lack of them. His impact forced the UFC to adapt to a new reality where fighters needed to be more well-rounded, leading to a more competitive and exciting sport. Next up, Groin-Shot Crackdown. Back in a no-holds-barred era, groin shots were totally legal. You could openly sock or kick someone's family jewels, and the ref would just let it ride. And of course, someone eventually did it. Enter UFC 4, 1994. Keith Hackney versus Joe's son, who, by the way, would later be convicted of some truly horrible crimes. But in the octagon, that's not what he's remembered for. During their fight, Joe's son had Hackney in a headlock from the bottom. Hackney, looking around like, is this really legal, just starts hammering him in the nuts over and over. 15 shots. No exageración. Joe's son eventually tapped out from a testicular beatdown. And that wasn't even the worst one. Fast forward to IVC 1, 1997. The International Veil Tudo Championship in Brazil, where Gary Goodridge took things to the next level. His opponent, Pedro Octavio, ended up underneath him, and Goodridge dug his toes into the guy's trunks, using them for grip, like rock climbing, but disgusting. Then he grabbed a literal handful of his opponent's junk to control the position. The ref didn't stop it. The crowd didn't even flinch. And yes, Goodridge won the fight. So between UFC and IVC, fighters were treating groins like legal targets. And unsurprisingly, it got banned. The UFC officially outlawed groin strikes in 1997, just months after IVC changed their rules. Digging into your opponent's trunks became a punishable offense. Which again, why was that ever allowed? Now, every fighter wears a protective cup, and refs always say, protect yourself at all times. In this context, that's just good advice. The point is, if your game plan used to involve nut shots, those days are over. And next, 12 to 6 elbows, MMA's most pointless rule. This one's easily the most controversial rule in all of MMA. And it all started because a 6 feet 10 inches giant smashed a smaller dude with elbows from the top rope. The rule? No, 12 to 6 elbows. That's a straight downward strike. Picture the hands of a clock going from 12, noon to 6. Illegal. Always has been under the unified rules. But ask any fighter, coach, or fan, and they'll probably say the same thing. Why? Let's go back to IFC Battleground 2, year 2000. Not a UFC event, but still incredibly influential. Gon McGee, a literal skyscraper of a man, was facing Brad Gabriel, who was definitely not skyscraper-sized. McGee got on top and started raining down straight vertical elbow drops, one after another, targeting Gabriel's head and neck. Total mismatch. Brutal finish. Watching cageside was Dr. Dom Kleda, one of the ringside physicians for the New Jersey State Athletic Control Board, the same people helping draft the unified rules of MMA later that year. And after watching McGee basically reenact a Mortal Kombat fatality, Kleda's immediate reaction was, ban that. Initially, he wanted to ban elbows altogether, but Big John McCarthy, who was also helping draft the rules, pushed back. Elbows are essential to the sport. You can't just erase them. So they landed on a compromise. Ban only the straight down vertical elbow, the 12 to 6 motion. Everything else, diagonal, spinning from the side, totally fine. Why that specific angle? According to Big John on Joe Rogan's podcast, it's because state officials had seen karate demos where guys broke blocks of ice with vertical elbows. No, seriously, ice breaking. That was the logic. And to this day, 12 to 6 elbows are still illegal, even though though pretty much everyone agrees it makes no sense. You can slam someone's skull with a spinning elbow from standing, but God forbid you drop one straight down from mount. And yes, Jon Jones's only career loss? It came from this exact rule. No More Speedos, the outfit that changed UFC dress code. Alright, let's talk about the time a grown man wore a tiny blue Speedo in front of a global audience and got banned for it. Every fighter you know today wasn't born champion. They were forged in struggle, poverty, and pain. These are the untold stories behind UFC's biggest names. Stick around, and if you love fight stories, make sure to subscribe and be part of their journey with us. Starting with Alex Pereira, from tire shop to double champ. Alex Pereira was born in São Bernardo do Campo, Brazil, on July 7, 1987. His childhood was tough. School wasn't much of an option, and by the age of 12, he was already working in a tire shop to help support his family. Around that same time, he slipped into heavy drinking, often finishing entire bottles in a single day. Life was heading down a dark path. At 22, searching for a way out, Alex walked into a kickboxing gym. That decision changed everything. He quickly discovered a natural gift for striking, and once he started competing, he tore through the local circuit. His relentless style carried him all the way to Glory Kickboxing, where he became a two-division champion. Along the way, he earned 2 victories over Israel Adesanya, a name that would come back into his story later. Even with the titles, the money wasn't enough to take care of his family. One night, Pereira saw Adesanya on TV, dismissing his skills and saying he wouldn't survive in the UFC. Those words lit a fire in him. He decided to make the jump to mixed martial arts. He started his MMA career in 2015, winning his first professional fight in Brazil before suffering an early setback. Instead of quitting, he kept pushing. In 2020, he delivered a devastating knockout in LFA, a performance that caught the UFC's attention. By 2022, his history with Adesanya became the center of attention. The UFC booked their long-awaited fight, and Pereira stunned the world by knocking Adesanya out to capture the middleweight championship. Less than a year later, he moved up to light heavyweight, claimed that title too, and defended it 3 times in just 6 months, cementing himself as one of the fastest rising champions in UFC history. Jorge Masvidal. Jorge Masvidal was born on November 12, 1984, in Miami, Florida. Life wasn't easy from the start. His father was sent to prison when Jorge was only 4 years old, leaving his mother to raise him on her own. She worked multiple jobs to keep things afloat, and Jorge often slept on the couch while she pushed through long nights. At one point, when money was especially tight, the family even lived out of an old car worth just a few $100s. As a teenager, Jorge found a way to earn quick money through backyard street fights. These brawls, filmed and shared online, helped him build a reputation as a fearless fighter. In high school, he wanted to wrestle, but his grades kept him off the team, so he turned to local gyms instead. One that had a big influence on him was Freestyle Fighting Academy, where he not only sharpened his skills, but also learned the discipline that would keep him in the sport long term. By 19, Jorge was ready to take the next step. He made his professional debut and won by knockout, setting the tone for what was to come. Over the years, he fought in major organizations like Bellator and Strikeforce, even earning a title shot against Gilbert Melendez. Though he came up short, the experience prepared him for bigger stages. In 2013, Masvidal finally made it to the UFC. His career there was full of ups and downs, but he consistently delivered exciting fights. Wins over names like Donald Cerrone and Darren Till raised his profile, but his defining moment came in July 2019. In just 5 seconds, Jorge landed a perfectly timed flying knee on Ben Askren, scoring the fastest knockout in UFC history and cementing his name in the sport forever. Charles Oliveira. Charles Oliveira was born on October 17, 1989, in a small coastal town in Brazil. His family lived with very little, often struggling to put food on the table. When Charles was just 7 years old, his life took a serious turn. He was diagnosed with rheumatic fever and a heart murmur, and doctors warned he might never walk again. His parents refused to accept that. They sold snacks and collected cardboard in the streets to pay for his treatment, determined to give their son a fighting chance. At 12, a neighbor named Paulo introduced Charles to a free Brazilian jiu-jitsu program for kids in tough situations. From the first class, he was hooked. Just 2 months later, he won his first state tournament as a white belt. Over the next few years, he collected medals at bigger competitions, and his dream of going further started to grow. By 17, Charles had his first MMA fight. He ripped through Brazil's regional circuit with quick finishes, sometimes fighting more than once in a single night. That grind earned him a UFC UFC debut in 2010, where he submitted Darren Elkins in just 41 seconds. Fans quickly saw his submission skills were special, and bonuses started piling up. But the journey wasn't easy. He faced setbacks, missed weight, and took some hard losses. Everything changed in 2018 when he moved to a new gym and sharpened his striking. From there, he went on an 11-fight win streak, capping it off in May 2021 with a knockout victory over Michael Chandler to become UFC lightweight champion. Along the way, he set multiple records: most submissions in UFC history, most finishes, and the most performance bonuses ever. Despite the success, Charles never forgot his roots. He gives back through charity in his hometown, and in 2025, he was honored with the Forrest Griffin Community Award for his work helping underprivileged kids. In the UFC, not all rules are written, but every fighter knows them. From fake glove touches, to silent agreements about fouls, to champions keeping their belts in razor-close fights. These aren't in the rulebook, but break them, and you'll lose more than just a match. Before we start, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into MMA's untold stories. These are the UFC's unspoken laws, the unwritten rules of the fight game. Starting with fake glove touching. At the beginning of many fights, it's common to see fighters reach out for a glove touch, a brief moment of mutual respect before the chaos begins. But when someone fakes that gesture just to land a cheap shot, one of the most universally hated unwritten rules in combat sports. Here's the thing, you're not required to touch gloves. If you've got bad blood or just want to get straight to business, you can skip it and no one hold against you. Fighters do it all the time. But if you pretend like you're going in for a glove touch and your opponent lets their guard down expecting that brief pause and aggression, and then you strike instead, that's dirty. No question about it. Technically, yes, it's legal, but morally, it's slimy. Fighters are taught from day one to protect themselves at all times. That's true, but the glove touch is seen as a small, unsaid agreement, a fleeting gesture of sportsmanship, a silent acknowledgement of respect before war begins. Violating that moment just to gain an advantage doesn't make you clever. It makes you look cheap. Even in boxing, when Floyd Mayweather sucker punched Victor Ortiz right after an awkward mid-fight hug, fans were divided. Some defended it by the rulebook. Others called it dishonorable. In MMA, it's even more frowned upon. Fake glove touches are so rare that when someone actually does it, fans remember, and not in a good way. And if you think that's bad, wait till you hear what fighters get away with next. The unspoken free pass. In most UFC fights, it feels like every fighter gets one free foul, whether it's a low blow, an eye poke, or grabbing the fence. The first offense usually doesn't come with any real consequences. The referee just gives a warning and lets the fight continue. No point deductions, no timeouts, just a verbal note and back to business. It's not an official rule written anywhere, but we see it happen all the time. A fighter lands a groin strike, the ref pauses the action, gives a quick warning, and resumes the fight. Same goes for eye pokes or blatant fence grabs used to prevent a takedown. Even when it's clear and obvious, the first foul almost never results in any immediate penalty. This has led many to believe that some fighters knowingly take advantage of it. Maybe they throw a questionable strike early on to slow their opponent down. As long as they play it off like an accident and it's their first offense, they know they'll likely get away with it. But that one accidentally shifts the momentum of a fight. There have even been bouts where fighters commit multiple fouls, 2, 3, even 4, and still never get docked a single point. This system needs to change. Points should be taken after a clear foul, not only after repeated ones. Because right now, as long as you commit just one, chances are you're in the clear. Just don't push your luck, or you might eventually lose a point. But not every foul gives you an advantage. Some give you a way out. The question is, will you take it? Imagine you're in a fight and things aren't going your way. You're down on the scorecards, getting outworked round after round. And then suddenly your opponent lands an illegal strike. Maybe it's a knee to the head while you're grounded. Now, technically you have a choice. You could tell the ref, I can't continue, and win the fight by disqualification. You get your hand raised, your record stays clean, and on paper, it goes down as a win. But here's the thing, most fighters and a lot of fans see that as a weak move. Even if it's completely within the rules, it's still frowned upon. If you are clearly losing, many believe you should push through and keep fighting unless you're genuinely unable to continue. Taking the DQ win can feel like gaming the system. One of the most talked about examples, Aljamain Sterling versus Petr Yan. Yan threw an illegal knee, and Sterling said he couldn't go on. He won by DQ, and with that, became the UFC UFC bantamweight champion. The backlash was immediate. Many fans believed he exaggerated the damage to get the belt, even though the strike was undeniably illegal. In the UFC, one mistake can end your entire career. A late punch, a dirty submission, a moment of rage, or something much darker. These aren't just losses. These are bans for life. Today, we're diving into the most shocking UFC bans ever. Start with Paul Daley. He was a renowned British fighter in the welterweight division and a fan favorite for his powerful and tactical prowess. However, at UFC 113, Daley let his emotions override his brain and fatefully let them end his UFC career. On May 8, 2010, Daley fought Josh Koscheck. The winner of this fight was going to become the next challenger against Georges St-Pierre for the UFC welterweight championship. Not only that, the winner would also get the opportunity to coach against St-Pierre on the 12th season of The Ultimate Fighter. In the past, Daley had shown immense promise, and many fans believed he had what it took to become the challenger. But things didn't go as they were planned. In the first round, Koscheck appeared to simulate being hit with an illegal knee, which resulted in a point deduction for Daley. This caused tempers to flare. During the fight, Koscheck went on to dominate Daley with his wrestling for most of the match and eventually was declared the winner by unanimous decision. But Daley didn't seem like he wanted to accept this defeat. Against the fence, he threw a punch at Koscheck after the final bell. The altercation, although short, quickly became one of the biggest scandals in UFC at the time. And by the end of the night, UFC President Dana White came forward with a shocking revelation. He announced that he was banning Daley from the UFC for life. White said, "There's no excuse for that. These guys are professional athletes. You don't ever hit a guy blatantly after the bell like that, whether you're frustrated or not." He added, "I don't care if he fights in every show all over the world and becomes the best, and everybody thinks he's the pound-for-pound best in the world. He will never fight in the UFC ever again." White followed by saying he spoke to Daley after the fight, and Daley had claimed he had not heard the bell. Daley later apologized for his actions after returning to the United Kingdom, saying that Koscheck's trash-talking pushed him over the edge, but that there was no excuse for his rash decision. While Daley did go on to fight in other tournaments, his UFC career truly came to an end that night. This, however, is nothing in comparison to what Rousimar Palhares did to get banned. Rousimar Palhares is a Brazilian mixed martial artist that was banned from the UFC for his almost sinister lack of sportsmanship. Palhares is mainly known for his insanely powerful ground game. 12 out of his 16 submission victories have come from leg locks. But that's where things get tricky. He's also known for his complete and absolute refusal to release submission holds, even when the opposing fighter has signaled submission or when the referee has called stop. Not releasing holds is already a serious offense, as it causes irreversible and unneeded physical damage to your opponent who's already yielded the fight. But Palhares liked to take it a step further. He would intentionally crank the hook further upon taps. Historically, Palhares wasn't known for following the rules. In the UFC middleweight division, after a loss, the UFC announced that Palhares had tested positive for elevated testosterone levels in his post-fight drug test and subsequently had been suspended for 9 months. When Palhares eventually dropped down to the welterweight division, he had his fateful fight against Mike Pierce on October 9th, 2013. Here, Palhares went in for his usual heel hook, and just 31 seconds into round 1, he finished with a submission. It was the only submission of the night, but instead of walking away with a bonus check, he walked right into a major controversy. Palhares had simply refused to release the hold for too long. Pierce, showing visible agony and pain, had tapped out 8 times, but rather than letting go, Palhares cranked the hook further. The referee at the time, Keith Peterson, went in headfirst to ease the pressure on Mike's leg while urging Palhares to let go. While he eventually did, the UFC later called it unsportsmanlike conduct. To put in perspective, the average time it takes for a fighter to let go is around 0.14 seconds. The fact that it took him longer seemed like a demented attempt to seriously injure his opponent. The next day, while conducting an interview, UFC President Dana White told ESPN's Jeremy Schaap that he was going to cut Palhares from their roster immediately and that he's done. Later, Zuffa released a statement via UFC reminding fans that this wasn't Palhares' first warning. He'd already been suspended for 90 days for a similar incident in 2010, where he didn't release a heel hook, coupled with his drug test failure. Although Palhares is still a successful fighter, the UFC truly did not look back at it. If Scorecards can tilt the outcome half of the fight, weight cuts can rewrite the card before it even begins. And no single weigh-in in recent memory has thrown the UFC into more chaos than UFC 279. The plan was simple: Khamzat Chimaev versus Nate Diaz in the main event. Weeks of build-up, media hype, trash talk, and then, just 24 hours before fight night, Chimaev steps on the scale. Not a pound over, not two, 7.5 pounds over the limit. In MMA, that's not a miss, that's a free fall. Within hours, the entire main card was ripped apart and reassembled like a jigsaw puzzle. Diaz was now facing Tony Ferguson. Chimaev got Kevin Holland. Everyone's game plan was gone. And here's where the internet lost its mind. Fans didn't just call it bad luck, they called it a setup. They told him to miss weight. Some said it's all scripted to sell more tickets. Social media lit up with claims that the UFC wanted to reshuffle the matchups for maximum drama, and that the scale fail was part of the plan. Dana White? He didn't just deny it. He torched the idea, called it fucking stupid, said Chimaev's body locked up mid-cut, that doctors made the call to stop him from losing any more weight. Even explained that pushing him further could have landed him in the hospital. To the UFC, it was an emergency they handled on the fly. To the skeptics, it was still too perfect. The bad guy versus the fan favorite got replaced with matchups that seemed almost tailor-made to please the crowd. Asterisk. Eyewitness accounts supported the official story. Chimaev reportedly fell ill, cramped up, and had to be pulled. The doctors confirmed it. The fights went ahead, and the crowd went wild. But here's the truth about conspiracy theories. They don't need proof to survive. They just need enough what if to keep people talking. And after UFC 279, one question still lingers in the minds of many. Was it a genuine weight cut disaster, or the most chaotic marketing stunt the UFC's ever pulled? The Khabib Scale Moment. If UFC 279 was a storm, the Khabib weigh-in was lightning caught on camera. It happened at UFC 254. The stakes? Huge. Khabib Nurmagomedov was about to defend his lightweight title, and every ounce mattered. The moment plays out in seconds. Khabib steps on the scale. The official glances down, slides the beam across, and almost instantly calls out 155.0, the number every lightweight dreams of hitting. But to eagle-eyed viewers, something didn't add up. Slow the footage, frame by frame, and you'll see it. The beam doesn't settle. It's still moving when the call is made. Enter Mike Dolce, a respected weight cut coach. He called the moment disturbing, claiming the official swiped the scale before it stopped, possibly shaving off a fraction of a pound. In a division where 155.1 means you don't fight for the belt, that fraction could be everything. Dolce even suggested Khabib might not have actually made the limit if the beam had been left to rest. The Nevada Commission? They stood by the result. Officially, Khabib was on weight. His camp laughed off the accusations, saying the cut was smooth, even easy. But that's the thing with moments like this. They live in the space between what we see and what we're told. And every time fans rewatch the clip, that tiny flicker of doubt gets just a little bigger. For Khabib supporters, it's a nothing burger, a technicality with zero bearing on the fight. For the conspiracy crowd, it's proof of a bigger system that protects certain fighters when the stakes are high. Because if you think about it, how many weigh-ins aren't streamed live? How many calls are made behind closed doors? And if one can slip by on camera, what happens when nobody's watching? Khabib went on to dominate that night, retiring undefeated. But to some fans, the legacy has a tiny asterisk, not for what happened in the octagon, but for what might have happened on the scale. Money, monopolies, and star power. If the scale can spark controversy over a fraction of a pound, imagine what happens when the numbers have 6 or 7 zeros after them. Because in the UFC, money doesn't just talk, it decides who fights when they fight, and sometimes who's still on the roster after the dust settles. Here's a number that stunned a lot of fans when it came out in court documents. While other major sports leagues share about 50% of their revenue with athletes, the UFC's fighter share has been calculated as low as 18.6%. That figure didn't come from a random blog. It surfaced in an antitrust lawsuit where former fighters accused the UFC of running a near monopoly that kept pay artificially low. In mid-2024, that case made headlines when a judge rejected a proposed $335 million settlement. Translation: the court wasn't satisfied, and the fight over fighter pay was far from over. By 2025, new lawsuits were piling up, with fresh claims that the UFC's market dominance lets it control not just contracts, but careers. Why does this matter for conspiracies? Because Because when a handful of fighters bring in the lion's share of pay-per-view buys, the temptation to protect those assets is enormous. Think about it. If a star like Conor McGregor or Jon Jones pulls in millions every time they step into the cage, are you really going to risk them losing momentum over a bad matchup or a suspension? From a cold business perspective, protecting stars isn't corruption, it's asset management. If you thought losing a belt over half a pound was harsh, Nick Diaz was about to lose 5 years of his career over weed. Nick Diaz never followed the rules, and in 2015, that nearly ended his career. At UFC 183, Diaz made his long-awaited return, facing Anderson Silva in a high-profile showdown. He lost by decision, but weeks later, no one was talking about the fight. The headlines were all about a drug test. Diaz had tested positive for marijuana metabolites. It was his third offense for cannabis use in Nevada. And this time, the Nevada State Athletic Commission dropped the hammer. Hard. They handed Diaz a 5-year suspension and fined him $165,000, a punishment harsher than what most fighters got for using actual performance-enhancing drugs. The room gasped. Reporters were stunned. Meanwhile, Anderson Silva, who tested positive the same night for multiple anabolic steroids, only received a 1-year suspension. The backlash was immediate. Fans, fighters, and media figures across the MMA world called it what it clearly was: unfair, personal, vindictive. A hit job, a Change.org petition demanding the punishment be overturned quickly gained over 100,000 signatures. UFC stars like Ronda Rousey and Conor McGregor spoke out in Diaz's defense. Even Dana White, never exactly close with Nick, admitted the suspension was ridiculous. At the hearing, one commissioner told Diaz, "Your lawyers were very persuasive, but you don't respect us." This wasn't about weed. It was about power, and Nick had spent years defying theirs. Eventually, public pressure forced their hand. The suspension was reduced to 18 months, and the fine cut to $100,000. But the damage was already done. Nick Diaz had lost another prime year and wouldn't fight again for 6. But sometimes, even when you leave everything in the cage, the recognition doesn't come. At UFC 318, New Orleans, the main event, Max Holloway versus Dustin Poirier, a 5-round war between two legends and the final chapter of Poirier's storied career. From the opening bell, it was electric. Holloway stunned Poirier early. Later, Poirier nearly sealed the deal with a deep choke. By round 5, they were standing toe-to-toe, bleeding, battered, and fueled by pure heart. When the decision came down, Holloway retained his BMF title by unanimous call. 49-47, 49-47, 48-47. But backstage in the press room, the real shock came from what didn't happen. When the post-fight bonuses were announced, Fight of the Night, the coveted $50,000 award, didn't go to Holloway or Poirier. Instead, it was given to a preliminary bout, Brendan Allen versus Marvin Vettori. Holloway's reaction captured what everyone was thinking. How the hell did we not get Fight of the Night? That's some _sir. Let's go tell Dana. Poirier, visibly stunned, echoed the disbelief. We didn't get it? No, it's some bullshit. The MMA world erupted online. Fans, fighters, and media alike called it a robbery. The main event wasn't just the fight of the night, it was the emotional and physical peak of the entire card. Had Poirier received the bonus, he would have broken a record for most fight of the night honors in UFC history. 11 in total, surpassing all others. Now he remains tied. Frustration swept through the community. Holloway confronted reporters live, calm, but clearly disappointed, demanding answers, asking the question everyone was thinking. What else did we need to do? Now, let's talk about Jon Jones' controversial comeback. After a 15-month suspension for a failed drug test, he was set to return against Alexander Gustafsson at UFC 232, a long-awaited rematch scheduled for Las Vegas. Fight week arrived. The posters were up. Fans had already landed in Nevada. Then everything collapsed. Just 6 days before the event, the Nevada State Athletic Commission refused to license Jones. Not because he failed a new drug test, but because he still had trace amounts of turinabol, the same banned substance he tested positive for in 2017, lingering in his system. USADA said it wasn't a new ingestion. They called it a pulsing effect. Scientists backed the idea. Nevada wasn't convinced. With the holidays approaching, they said they needed more time to evaluate. They wouldn't clear Jones to fight, so Dana White made a move no one saw coming. He relocated the entire event. UFC 232 was moved from Las Vegas to Los Angeles on less than a week's notice. California had previously licensed Jones. They reviewed the same data and approved him almost immediately. The card stayed intact. The venue changed. Overnight, fighters, teams, and fans were told to rebook flights, switch hotels, and move training camps across state lines. It was chaos. Fighters on the card lost money. Some couldn't bring full corners. Others had family locked out by the sudden travel shift. One fighter, Megan Anderson, called it disrespectful. Another said, "It'll cost us." It won't cost Jon. It didn't. Jones fought Gustafsson at the Forum in Englewood and dominated. TKO in round 3. He reclaimed the light heavyweight belt and walked away clean. But the message was clear. When a star is big enough, the rules bend. But eats and got banned for it. It's UFC 133, 2011. We've got veteran fighter Dennis Hallman squaring off against Brian Ebersol. And Hallman decides this is the perfect moment to settle a bet he made with his teammates by walking out in the tiniest pair of blue briefs ever seen in a sanctioned MMA fight. And we're not talking about compression shorts. We're talking straight up banana hammock, somewhere between a swimsuit and a cry for help. The fight starts, and Ebersol is clearly distracted. Hallman's junk is everywhere. There's a full-blown wardrobe crisis happening in the octagon. Commentators are cracking jokes. The crowd is laughing, and Dana White is furious. He reportedly said it was, quote, disgusting, and that no one would ever fight in the UFC again looking like that. To make things worse, Hallman loses the fight by TKO. And while Dana claimed his release wasn't related to the outfit, let's just say fighters usually don't get cut after one loss if they're veterans with name value. From that day forward, the UFC updated its dress code. Fighters were banned from wearing Speedo-style trunks or anything that might accidentally flash the audience. Fight kits became more standardized, first through sponsors, and later through the Reebok and Venom deals. And now, if you type Dennis Hallman into Google, the top auto suggestions are still Speedo and shorts. So yeah, the legend lives on, just not in the cage. Next up, Keith Hackney walked into the octagon at UFC 3 as a middleweight fighter, standing across from Emmanuel Yarbrough, a super heavyweight sumo wrestler towering at over 600 pounds. It was the type of matchup that defined the chaos of early MMA. No weight classes, bare-knuckle strikes, and rules that encourage creativity, sometimes at the cost of sportsmanship. What followed would become one of the most controversial moments in UFC history, one that prompted the organization to start redefining its boundaries. Hackney, dwarfed by Yarbrough in both size and weight, faced an uphill battle from the first bell. This was no ordinary fight, and Hackney's approach reflected that. Aware of the overwhelming physical advantages his opponent brought to the cage, Hackney targeted the area of least resistance, Yarbrough's groin. Repeatedly, Hackney drove strikes into his much larger opponent's most vulnerable spot, forcing Yarbrough to crumble under the pain. Hackney's unconventional tactics forced the UFC to confront the balance between raw entertainment and professionalism. Exploiting vulnerabilities was one way to win. But what happens when skill rewrites the rulebook instead? BJ Penn didn't just compete in mixed martial arts. He broke the boundaries that defined it. Known as the Prodigy, Penn was one of the rare fighters who seemed unconstrained by the weight divisions meant to keep competition fair. In an era when fighters typically stayed within a single weight class, Penn's willingness to climb the scale and challenge larger opponents revealed a critical flaw in the UFC's framework. Weight classes were too broad and, in some cases, poorly regulated. Penn built his reputation in the lightweight division, where his technical skill and adaptability put him leagues above most of his peers. However, what truly set him apart was his ambition to step outside of his natural weight class and face physically larger and stronger opponents. This ambition was on full display at UFC 46, when he moved up to welterweight to face then champion Matt Hughes. Hughes, a dominant wrestler and the defending title holder, was expected to overpower Penn with his size and strength advantage. Instead, it was Penn who dominated the fight, submitting Hughes in the first round with a rear naked choke. The victory not only secured Penn's status as one of the most versatile fighters of his era, but also also forced the UFC to reckon with how it structured its divisions. Penn's dominance forced fairness into the equation. But when it came to cage tactics, another fighter challenged an altogether different kind of rule. Tank Abbott, throwing fighters out. Back in the Wild West days of the UFC, Tank Abbott was known for being an absolute savage. At UFC 11, he fought Cal Worsham, and things got out of control real fast. Tank dropped Worsham with some heavy punches, and then, in true Tank fashion, he just lost it. He straight up tried to throw Worsham out of the octagon. He picked him up and flung him toward the fence like he was tossing out the trash. And here's the craziest part. Cal almost flew completely out. His body was halfway over the top, and the only thing that stopped him was the cage padding he managed to grab onto. At the time, the UFC didn't have specific rules about that kind of stuff, because no one thought a fighter would literally try to eject someone mid-fight. But after that, the UFC added clear rules banning the act of throwing or pushing fighters out of the cage. It was dangerous, obviously, and it was a bad look for the sport. Tank Abbott already had a reputation for being unpredictable and violent, but this incident pushed the UFC to tighten things up. No more WWE-style body launches. These aren't just weird moments, they shaped the UFC into what it is today. So if you love the raw, untold side of MMA, hit subscribe and join the fight for the full story. Kevin Ferguson. Kevin Ferguson, better known to the world as Kimbo Slice, was born on February 8, 1974 in the Bahamas. He grew up with two brothers, raised by a single mother who eventually moved the family to Florida in search of a better life. From a young age, Kevin had a fighter spirit. At 13, he got into his first real fight, defending a friend at school, a moment that stayed with him. In high school, he played linebacker and earned a football scholarship to the University of Miami. But life threw him off course. When Hurricane Andrew struck in 1992, it destroyed his home and left him living in his car for a month. Financial struggles forced him to leave college after a year and a half. To get by, he worked whatever jobs he could: bouncer, bodyguard, even strip club security. In the early 2000s, he found unexpected fame. Kimbo became a street fighting legend, taking part in raw, bare-knuckle brawls that spread across the internet. One fight left his opponent with a nasty cut above the eye, and from then on, the name Slice stuck. By 2005, he decided to step into professional fighting. His first official MMA fight in 2007 saw him submit former heavyweight boxer Ray Mercer. He followed that with a win over Tank Abbott, which pushed his popularity even higher. Kimbo signed with Elite XC and quickly became one of MMA's first mainstream stars. In 2009, he joined The Ultimate Fighter, drawing record-breaking ratings, and later debuted in the UFC with a gritty win over Houston Alexander. From 2011 to 2013, he turned to boxing, going undefeated in 7 fights with 6 knockouts. Eventually, he returned to MMA with Bellator, even facing off against Ken Shamrock in 2015. Tragically, Kimbo Slice passed away in 2016 at just 42 years old from heart failure. His larger-than-life story left behind an unforgettable legacy, one that his son, known as Baby Slice, has carried on in combat sports. Now contrast that with Anthony Smith. Jon Jones hit him with a clear illegal knee during their title fight. Smith was behind on the cards and could have taken the DQ win and walked away as champion. Instead, he shrugged it off and kept fighting. He lost the fight, but gained something else: respect. So here's the unspoken rule. If you're getting beat and you get fouled, don't quit unless you're seriously hurt. The win might look good on your record, but fans and fellow fighters won't forget how you got it. You lost. Now what? In the UFC, what you say after the fight might define you more than what you did inside the cage. In MMA, there's one golden rule that fighters and fans alike tend to agree on: don't make excuses. Take the loss, own it, and move forward. But despite how widely accepted this idea is, fighters break this rule all the time. Right after a fight, you'll often hear something like, "I'm not making excuses," but followed by a long list of excuses. It's always the same story: "I was battling the flu," or "my training camp was a disaster," or "my foot was injured the whole time." It's their way of trying to explain a poor performance without sounding like they're whining, even though that's exactly how it comes across. Almost every fighter has done this at some point, and honestly, it's one of the most frustrating habits in the sport. No one forced you into the cage. You knew your condition, knew the risks, and still made the walk. That means you accepted the terms. Now here's the twist. If a fighter wins and later says, "I had a broken hand the whole time," fans celebrate it. They see it as a badge of toughness. But when a fighter loses and says the same thing, it sounds like damage control. Like they're looking for a way to soften the defeat instead of just accepting it. This rule exists because fighting is about accountability. The moment you agree to step into that cage, you're saying, I'm ready. If things go wrong, that's still on you. Sure, most fighters aren't 100% on fight night. Most of them do have valid reasons for falling short, but bringing those reasons up afterward rarely helps. It just makes it look like you're trying to explain away the loss instead of owning it. And in this sport, nothing earns respect like taking a loss on the chin and saying he was the better man tonight. There's trash talk, and then there's dragging someone's family into it. Cross that line, and it's not just business anymore. It's war. So don't get family involved. You can say your opponent is overrated, has no cardio, or whatever else you want. But the moment you bring up their wife, kids, parents, or anything personal, you have crossed the line. Even though there are no official rules about trash talk, most fighters and fans agree that going after someone's family is cheap and disrespectful. Some fighters have ignored this rule completely. Conor McGregor, Colby Covington, and Chael Sonnen are known for saying wild things. Conor talked about Khabib's wife, his religion, and even his father. Colby took shots at Jorge Masvidal's kids and family. When this kind of stuff happens, fans get upset, fighters get furious, and it just makes everything uncomfortable. Fighters take it seriously because their families are not part of the fight. They did not sign up to be targets, and they're not the ones stepping into the cage. So when you bring them into it, it feels like you're going for the lowest blow possible. It's not about selling the fight anymore. It becomes personal, and once it gets that personal, things can explode quickly. Post-fight brawls, backstage scraps, even press conference meltdowns. A lot of that starts when someone crosses this line. If you do break this rule, just know that the fight might not be the end of it. You might win the match, but you'll be seen as the loser in everyone's eyes. The fake shiny belt. When a fighter wins an interim title, the whole point is that they're the temporary champion until the real champ is ready to defend. The idea is simple. The interim belt holder should be next in line. They should automatically fight the actual champion to decide who the real champ is. That is the entire reason interim belts exist. But here's the problem. It doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes the UFC gives the title shot to someone else, skips the interim champ, or just leaves them waiting for months. So even though they have a belt around their waist, it ends up feeling kind of meaningless if they are not guaranteed that title fight. Fighters really hate this because winning an interim title is not easy. It's not just handed out. They go through a tough training camp, beat another top contender, and rightfully expect their shot at the undisputed belt. But if the UFC thinks someone else will sell more pay-per-views, the interim champ might get pushed aside. That's why a lot of fans feel like the interim title is fake. It's just a shiny reward with no power behind it. Now the final unwritten rule. In the UFC, there's an unwritten rule fans always talk about. If you want to take the belt, you have to really beat the champ. Either knock him out or dominate every round. Just winning a close decision isn't enough for some fans, or even some judges. And if you think about it, it doesn't really make much sense. Fights are judged round by round, and whoever wins more rounds is supposed to win the fight. But since the champ holds the title, people act like you have to do something crazy to take it from him. So even if the challenger barely edges it out, people still say he didn't really beat the champ. It's like the champion gets bonus points just for being the champion. That's why in super close fights, the champ often keeps the belt, even if a bunch of fans think the other guy should have one. It's not fair, but it happens all the time, and fighters know this. If you're fighting for the belt, you know a close one might not get you the gold. That's why challengers try to either finish the fight or make it super clear they dominated, so there's no doubt in anyone's mind. At the end of the day, this rule isn't official. It's just something people believe, but it still ends up affecting how judges score fights and how fans react. So even if you technically outscore the champ, if it's not clear enough, people might still say you didn't really earn it. In the UFC, you don't just fight the opponent, you fight the system. If you want more deep dives into the fight game's secrets, hit that subscribe button and I'll see you in the next round, just like they didn't with Jason High. Jason High's UFC career didn't end in the octagon due to a loss. It ended with a split-second decision fueled by frustration, a decision he paid a very hefty fee for. In 2014, Jason stepped into the cage to face Rafael dos Anjos. The fight in question didn't go his way, and dos Anjos was relentless. After a flurry of strikes, the referee stepped in and waved it off, calling it a TKO loss. Jason, however, didn't see it that way. He'd already lost many fights before this, and this one was the last shot he had to prove himself. He thought the stoppage was premature, and in the heat of the moment, he snapped. In a career-ending move, he turned to the referee, Kevin Mulhall, and shoved him. Right there, his whole career took a nosedive. Touching a referee is one of the biggest taboos in combat sports, and it clearly disgusted Dana White. I'm going to cut him. I'll look at the way Paul Daley put his hands on his opponent after a fight was over. You don't ever fucking touch a referee, ever. You're done here. He's been apologizing on Twitter, but he's done. Dana White comparing it to Daley shows how critical Jason's actions were. Daley was banned for life, and now Jason was added to that very short list. Within hours, Jason's name was scrubbed from the UFC roster. He issued a public apology on Twitter, hoping to smooth things over, but it didn't matter. The UFC had made its decision, and it wasn't changing. All this showed was that the organization holds its referees in the highest regard. They're there to protect fighters, make the tough calls, and keep order. The moment that order is broken, even for a second, the UFC wanted to prove that it acts fast. For Jason, it was a career-ending misstep. One moment of emotion, and just like that, the UFC door slammed shut. But for others, like War Machine, the actions weren't split-second decisions, but extended levels of demented behavior. But to the conspiracy crowd, this is the smoking gun. They see questionable matchmaking, suspicious scorecards, and sudden rule flexibility as part of the same machine, one designed to keep the cash cows fat and healthy. And when you add in the fact that the UFC's finances are mostly private, the mystery deepens. Without a public breakdown of revenue, the missing millions become a blank canvas for the wildest theories. Secret bonuses, under-the-table deals, golden handshake payoffs. The UFC insists that every fighter is treated equally and that pay is based on market value. Critics say that market value is just code for we'll take care of our favorites. And every time a superstar gets fast-tracked to a title shot or returns from controversy straight into a main event, that belief grows stronger. Because in the fight business, the cleanest knockout you'll ever see is money knocking common sense right out of the ring. Influence from abroad. If money can tilt the playing field, political power can flip it completely. And in the UFC, few stories blur the line between sport and politics like the influence of Ramzan Kadyrov. Kadyrov isn't just the head of Chechnya. He's a figure accused by multiple governments and human rights groups of severe abuses. Yet in MMA, he's the man behind Akhmet MMA, a state-backed fight club that bankrolls fighters with salaries, training camps, medical care, and, in some cases, luxury cars. Fighters connected to his circle, including UFC star Khamzat Chimaev, have openly acknowledged receiving gifts like multiple Mercedes-Benz vehicles. We're not talking rumors. We're talking interviews, photos, videos. Critics call it sports washing, using athletic success to polish the image of a regime accused of brutality. Supporters see it as nothing more than generosity toward athletes from his homeland. But here's where the unease creeps in. When your career, your paycheck, and maybe even your personal safety are tied to a political strongman, how free are you to say no? The optics get even more complicated when you see high-profile UFC names, from Khabib Nurmagomedov to Fabricio Verdum, training in Akhmet gyms, posing for photos, or attending Kadyrov's lavish events. For conspiracy theorists, this isn't casual networking. It's influence. It's leverage. And when those same fighters win big on the world stage, the theory writes itself. Political capital is being traded in the shadows of the octagon. The UFC has never been caught in any direct wrongdoing here. But to critics, even the appearance of political entanglement can cast a long shadow over the sport. Because in combat sports, power doesn't just come from fists and footwork. It comes from who's in your corner. And when your corner happens to be a geopolitical player, every victory, every title, every stare down start to look like part of a much bigger game. In the end, whether you see this as strategic networking or something far darker depends on how much faith you have that the fight business is only about fighting. For many fans, that faith is already hanging by a thread. The classics, grease, paper records, and a flying kick. Not every UFC theory is about money or politics. Some are just so strange they've become part of MMA folklore and still make you wonder, what if? Greasegate, UFC 94. BJ Penn accuses Georges St-Pierre's corner of rubbing Vaseline on his body to make him harder to clinch. The commission wipes him down, lets the fight stand. Years later, Dana White says he's 100% sure it happened. Officially, minor infraction. Unofficially, a legend was born. The vanishing record. Askar Mazarov arrives with an impressive win, lost tally, until media exposes aliases and missing losses. His record flips, he loses, gets cut, and his promos vanish like he never existed. The Showtime kick conspiracy. Anthony Pettis runs up the cage, lands the most replayed kick ever. Fans claim Henderson tapped his foot as a secret signal. Both deny it, but when a knockout looks that cinematic, people start imagining scripts. That's the magic and the danger of UFC conspiracies. Well, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. There's always more behind the scenes in the octagon. But UFC 232 wasn't the first time Jon Jones disrupted an entire event. Years earlier, his decision led to something even more dramatic. The first canceled in UFC history. It was set to be Jon Jones versus Dan Henderson. UFC 151, Las Vegas. Light heavyweight title on the line. But just 10 days out, disaster struck. Henderson tore his MCL. The fight was off. The UFC scrambled. In desperation, they turned to Chael Sonnen, offering him the fight on short notice. Sonnen said yes immediately. No training camp, no hesitation, just a shot of gold. But Jon Jones said no. Without a main event, Dana White pulled the plug. UFC 151 was canceled. The first pay-per-view in UFC history to be completely scrapped. The fallout was swift and brutal. Fighters on the undercard who had trained for months lost their paychecks. Sponsors pulled out. Fans lost money on flights, hotels, and non-refundable bookings. Dana White didn't hold back. He pointed the finger at Greg Jackson, Jones' coach, calling him a sport killer. He slammed Jones for being selfish, accusing him of costing dozens of fighters their livelihoods. Jon Jones defended his choice. He argued that accepting a new opponent on 10 days' notice, without a full camp, was reckless and unfair. He made a calculated decision, not an emotional one, but the damage was already done. The UFC later rebooked the fight with Sonnen at UFC 159 the following year. Jones won by TKO, but the backlash from UFC 151 never fully disappeared. For many, it was the moment Jon Jones stopped being just a champion and started becoming a controversial figure. Now, let's talk about the Scorecards controversy. The octagon has seen knockouts, submissions, and upsets, but nothing causes more chaos than the judges' scorecards. Some decisions don't just confuse fans, they break trust. Take UFC 104. Lyoto Machida versus Mauricio Shogun, 5 hard rounds. Rua chopped at Machida's legs, landed body kicks, and pushed the pace. Almost every media outlet scored it for Rua, but the judges gave it to Machida, unanimous. The crowd booed. Even Dana White later said, "I had it 4-1 Shogun." A rematch was booked. Rua ended it in 1 knockout. Then there's Leonard Garcia versus Nam Fan at the TUF 12 finale. Fan clearly outstruck Garcia all 3 rounds. Worked the body, stayed composed. Commentators were already congratulating him mid-fight. The decision, Garcia by split. The reaction, stunned silence. Then outrage. Bisping versus Hamill. Sanchez versus Campman. Henderson versus Edgar II. GSP versus Hendricks. Each added to the pile. Inconsistent scoring. Regional bias. Outdated boxing standards. Fighters were left wondering, what matters more? Damage, volume, or control? The UFC revised its criteria in 2017, giving more weight to effective striking and impact. But change has been slow. Commissions still vary. Judging stays subjective. Fighters aim for knockouts. Fans pray for clarity. And every time a close fight goes the wrong way, old ghosts come back to life. Now let's talk about the night. Even GSP's image got a little greasy. GSP always been seen as one of the cleanest guys in the UFC. No failed drug tests, no scandals, just straight up discipline and respect. That reputation stayed solid until his rematch with BJ Penn at UFC 94. That's when things got a little greasy. BJ's team claimed GSP had Vaseline rubbed on his chest and shoulders between rounds to make him harder to grapple. They said it was a sneaky move to shut down BJ's jiu-jitsu from the bottom. And if you watch the footage, they kind of had a point. You can clearly see GSP's cornerman putting Vaseline on his face. which is normal for cuts. But then he rubs it on his shoulders and back too, which is illegal. But the fight went on. GSP looked sharp and dominant, and he ended up finishing BJ in round 4. The commission reviewed everything afterward, but didn't overturn the result. GSP said it was just a breathing technique his team always used. Nothing shady. Still, BJ never let it go. To this day, he insists that the fight wasn't fair, and that he got cheated out of a real chance. I'm totally with BJ on this one. Look, every weekend, it's kind of a tradition now. Me and the boys, we lather up in Vaseline, switch off the lights, and wrestle like it's the finals of some underground championship. And let me tell you, it's no joke. The struggle, the strategy, the sweat, it's real. And before you even say it, no, I'm not talking about anything else being hard. I'm talking about the wrestling, all right? It's brutal out there in the dark. Some fights end with knockouts, but these moments ended with confusion, silence, and controversy. They didn't just shake careers, they exposed the cracks in the sport itself. And while the cameras moved on, these stories still echo. If this is the side of MMA they don't want you to see, then hit subscribe, because this is just the beginning. Mark Hunt. Mark Hunt was born in South Auckland, New Zealand in 1974 into a large Samoan family. His father was violently abusive, leaving Hunt and his siblings battered so badly they often missed school. In his autobiography, Hunt described being tied up and whipped until skin peeled from his back, while his sister endured even harsher punishment. Those scars never left him. As a teenager, Hunt carried that rage into the streets. He fought in nightclubs and alleys, quickly earning a reputation for his knockout power. Stories spread of the short, stocky Samoan who could drop men with a single punch. One night outside a nightclub, after flooring several opponents, a bouncer pulled him aside. Instead of calling police, he offered Hunt a way out, an invitation to train. That chance changed everything. Hunt poured himself into Muay Thai and kickboxing, turning raw aggression into skill. In 2001, he shocked the world by winning the K1 World Grand Prix, defeating some of the best strikers alive. The former street brawler was now a world champion. By 2004, Hunt transitioned into MMA with Japan's Pride Fighting Championships, where he beat legends like Wanderlei Silva and Mirko Cro Cop. Fans loved his power and his calm, almost playful demeanor in the chaos. He joined the UFC in 2010, endured early struggles, but from 2011 to 2014, made a roaring comeback with highlight knockouts and even a shot at the interim heavyweight title. His signature walk-off knockouts became iconic. Jose Aldo. Jose Aldo was born on September 9, 1986, in Manaus, a city deep in the Brazilian Amazon. From the very start, life tested him. At a family gathering, his older sister got into an argument, grabbed his crib, and threw it toward another sibling. She didn't realize baby Jose was still inside. The crib landed face first on a burning barbecue, leaving scars on his face that remain to this day. His family was extremely poor, and many nights there was no food on the table. Hunger was something he grew used to. His mother eventually left, and Aldo was raised mostly by his father, a bricklayer who worked long hours to keep the family afloat. Despite it all, Jose carried big dreams. Like most Brazilian kids, he first believed soccer could change his life. But as he grew older, it wasn't the ball that called to him, it was fighting. Street scraps came naturally, and he realized he had a gift for it. By his early teens, he began training however he could, often on the streets, until Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gave him his first real structure. At just 17, Aldo made the bold choice to leave his hometown behind and chase his dream in the city. With no job, no money, and nowhere to live, he slept on gym floors and trained every day. Eventually, he found his way into one of Brazil's top MMA camps, where his journey truly began. He tore through the local scene, caught the attention of the WEC, and quickly became one of their brightest stars. When the UFC absorbed the division, Aldo was crowned the first featherweight champion in company history. His reign lasted over 5 years, a stretch of dominance where he defended his belt against the best in the world: Chad Mendes, Frankie Edgar, Kenny Florian, Ricardo Lamas. His speed, precision, and devastating leg kicks made him nearly untouchable. But Aldo's story isn't remembered only for his victories. In December 2015, he faced Conor McGregor in one of the most hyped fights the sport had ever seen. 13 years unbeaten, Aldo entered as the king of the division. But in just 13 seconds, one left hand ended his streak. Became one of the most replayed moments in UFC history. For many, that knockout defined him. But Aldo's true legacy is bigger than one night. He rose from hunger and hardship in the Amazon to become one of the greatest champions MMA has ever seen. From broken homes to world championships, these fighters proved that greatness greatness is built on struggle. Their battles outside the cage shape the legends we see inside it. If you enjoyed these stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. And tell me in the comments which fighter's journey you want to hear next. War Machine, born Jonathan Koppenhaver, was once an up-and-coming name in the fighting world. But what happened outside the cage is what would ultimately define him. In 2014, War Machine's life and career took a violent and irreversible turn, all by his own hands. He was the cause of a brutally violent attack on his ex-girlfriend Christy Mack and her friend who was present in the house at the time. According to reports, he had broken into her house and, in a fit of rage, got into a physical altercation with her and her friend Corey Thomas. After beating Corey to the point where he started convulsing, he told him to leave the house. Now that he had Christy alone, he grotesquely started beating her until he caused her to have a broken eye socket, multiple broken ribs, and lost teeth. He also attempted to sexually assault her and cut all her hair off. After all of this, he went to look for a knife, at one point claiming that he had to offer. Christy took this window of opportunity to get outside and bang on any neighbor's door until they listened and called the cops. What's truly disturbing, however, is how Jonathan portrayed it in his tweets after the incident. He alleged that he loved her and ended up fighting for his life, contrary to what actually happened. In response, Christy posted the graphic images of the aftermath of their altercation on her Twitter to show proof of what she went through. War Machine was arrested and later convicted on 29 charges, including sexual assault and kidnapping. The story made national headlines, and not just in the fight world. After a crime like this, all chances of having any career dissolved. National headlines were one thing. It also took the MMA world by storm. Everyone was questioning the sport and the type of people it brought into the spotlight. Fingers were being pointed, and something had to be done. Really frustrated the UFC. Every headline labeled him as an ex-UFC fighter. And Dana White? He wasn't having it. It's horrible, man. Horrible. White said in response to the media frenzy. And every time I got to see ex-UFC fighter, when the stories are written, he fought twice in the UFC 6 years ago. He's a current Bellator Viacom fighter. White went on to say that his staff contacted news outlets to correct the narrative, only to hear, "We don't know what Bellator is." His response was simple. Ever heard of Viacom? That's who he fights for. He fights for Viacom, not the UFC. The UFC had long cut ties with War Machine. The organization's stance on violent criminal behavior outside the octagon is crystal clear: zero tolerance, no comebacks, and definitely no reconsideration. War Machine was sentenced to life in prison, with an increasingly slim chance of parole, erasing any hope of a return to UFC or a normal life outside of bars. Now, he's just another reminder, one of many we'll see further in this video, that talent in the cage means nothing if you can't control what happens outside of it. Matt Riddle. This lesson seems to be a hard one for fighters to realize. Once a rising force in the UFC's welterweight division, Riddle had all the tools to go far in the championship. Explosive energy, elite takedown defense, and a relentless pace that kept opponents guessing. But it wasn't any physical altercation that ended his UFC career. Instead, it was what showed up on a drug test. On February 26, 2013, Riddle revealed he had failed another test for marijuana, and that was his second violation in less than a year, becoming the obvious breaking point. The UFC released Riddle from the promotion. And here's the twist. Performance-wise, Riddle was thriving. He walked away ranked third in UFC history for takedown defense, an insane 89.3%. He was also 8th all-time in total strikes landed, with a whopping 1,350 shots connected. And without the marijuana-related no contests, his official UFC record would have stood at 10-3, riding a 5-fight win streak. He was on his way to climbing the UFC ranks. But 2 failed drug tests cut that momentum short. Instead of chasing title contention, Riddle was shown the door. Since then, he made a successful jump to professional wrestling. But fans can't help but wonder, what would his UFC career be like if the organization had more lenient laws around marijuana? As a response to this ordeal, White was adamant he'd never grace the octagon again, saying, "Everybody's going to have an excuse for why they were cut." Matt Riddle did an interview before that fight, where he said, "I smoke weed so that I don't beat my children." Then he tests positive for it. He's a fucking moron. That's why he's not here. He's cut because he's a moron. I'll make it real easy for him. We just won't ask him to come back. Thiago Silva. Some might say drugs are a fighter's biggest weakness. And Thiago Silva sure places some merit to those accusations. Silva's story was once all about potential. By 2009, he was a legitimate threat in the UFC's stacked light heavyweight division, and people were already whispering his name in title contention talks. But his rise inside the cage was slowly overshadowed by chaos outside of it. And by the end, Thiago Silva's UFC career had completely imploded. Let's start with the first major red flag. UFC 125, January 1st, 2011. Silva stepped in against Brandon Vera and delivered a dominant performance. It looked like a bounce-back moment, something to put his name back into the mix at 205. But the win didn't last long. Soon after the fight, the Nevada State Athletic Commission announced that Silva's urine sample raised serious concerns. In fact, after testing in 2 separate labs, they confirmed it was inconsistent with human urine, suggesting Silva had either altered or outright substituted his sample to cheat the drug test. The community erupted and news spread like wildfire. One day later, Silva confessed in a public statement. He admitted to using a urine adulterant in an attempt to alter the results of the drug test, fully acknowledging he had broken the rules. He said, "This was a terrible decision on my part. I am prepared to accept this punishment, learn from it, and move on." And it's safe to say that the punishment was harsh. The win over Vera was overturned to a no contest. He was suspended for 1 full year and fined a whopping $20,000 out of his $55,000 win bonus. All of this, and the added cloud of cheating, followed him from that point forward. However, he got some grace and returned to the octagon in 2012 and picked up a win over Stanislav Nedkov, but never fully regained momentum. Then, 2014 happened. On February 6th, 2014, Silva was arrested in Oakland Park, Florida, in what would become the most damaging incident of his career. Police reports said Silva had entered the Popovich Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Center armed and aggressive. The targets were Pablo Popovich, a respected BJJ coach, and Silva's estranged wife, Thesa Kamiji, who was allegedly in a relationship with Popovich at the time. It was a deeply personal conflict that escalated into a legal disaster. The day before, Kamiji had already filed a report claiming Silva violated a restraining order. Then came the confrontation at the gym, and Silva was arrested and charged with aggravated battery with a deadly weapon, aggravated assault, and resisting arrest without violence. The UFC acted immediately. Dana White didn't hold back. In an interview that same day, he stated, "He will never fight in the UFC again." Minner and Molina. These 2 fighters are not like the others on this list. This wasn't a knockout, wasn't a submission, but it might as well go down as one of the most damaging L's we've seen in UFC history. And it didn't even happen inside the cage. 2 former UFC fighters, Jeff Molina and Derek Minner, were officially suspended by the Nevada State Athletic Commission. But unlike past fighters, it was because of something that cuts deeper in the world of professional sports: gambling. Derek Minner, 34 years old, walked into his UFC bout on November 5th, 2022 with a serious knee injury. He didn't tell the commission. He didn't tell the medical staff. He stepped into the octagon compromised, and within the first round, he was finished by Shaylon Nurdambik. The way it unfolded wasn't just a routine TKO. It immediately raised suspicions. The fight ended in just over a minute, and it looked like Minner didn't belong there at all. But what really triggered the alarm bells was the betting activity before the fight. Unusual wagers came flooding in, all on Nurdambik to win early. That kind of action doesn't happen by accident, and it usually never goes unnoticed. U.S. Integrity, the organization that monitors sports betting irregularities, flagged it immediately. The fight became the focal point of an investigation that would reveal something much bigger than a single injured fighter trying to push through a bad night. Minner was eventually hit with a 29-month suspension for failing to disclose his injury. He's not eligible to return until March 26, 2025. But then the focus shifted to another name, Jeff Molina. At just 27 years old, Molina was considered one of the UFC's brightest flyweight prospects. Fast, sharp, and promising. But behind the scenes, he wasn't just watching that Minner fight, he was betting on it. And worse, he had core inside information. The allegations were that he knew Minner was hurt, and that's why he placed a substantial bet on that specific fight without disclosing anything to the commission. According to reports, Molina admitted to the violation. The result? A full 3-year suspension from sport. He won't be eligible to return until November 2025. But what ties these two fighters together, beyond the bad decisions, is one man, James Krause. A former UFC fighter turned coach, Krause was known for his technical mind and analytical approach to fighting. But he was also vocal about betting on MMA. In fact, Krause had previously said publicly that he made more money from betting than coaching. That raised eyebrows, and now he's right in the middle of a wide-reaching investigation into an alleged illegal gambling operation. Both Molina and Minner trained under Krause. And after the scandal erupted, the UFC moved fast. Fighters were immediately banned from training at Krause's gym. He was barred from cornering fighters. His license was suspended. The message from the UFC was clear. Until this is resolved, there's no room for Krause anywhere near the organization. As of now, Krause hasn't said a word publicly, and the investigation still continues in court. Minner's punishment ends in early 2025, and Molina's follows later that year. But the stain on their reputations and the broader consequences of this scandal may last much longer. The UFC, like all major sports organizations, is walking a fine line between embracing the world of legalized betting and protecting the integrity of the sport. In the UFC, the cage can make you a legend, or end everything you've worked for in a single second. If this story shocked you, there's a lot more coming. So hit that subscribe button and don't miss what's next.